Welcome to Home with Jess Nilson. Today we're chatting with Peggy Kalt, local realtor and appraiser, about adding value to our home, different types of appraisals, and a little bit on tiny homes. So thanks for being with us today, Peggy.
Well, thanks, Jess, for having me. I enjoy talking with you about stuff that we enjoy and totally understand.
I love it too. It's fun. It is. So what would be a fun afternoon for you?
Well, if I'm not working, a fun afternoon is working with my two reining horses, and when the snow is gone, I love to golf.
Golfing,
Yes.
Are you good at golf?
Some days I'm okay, and some days I'm not really good.
Can you give me a lesson at golf?
I could give you a lesson, but every day is different, so you never know when you show up how it's going to go.
Oh, I know how it's going to go when I show up. I know how it's going to go. It's going to be very entertaining. Yep. So what got you interested in the real estate industry?
I had been in the medical field for about 30 years, and my kids were growing, and I was just ready for a new avenue, and I got interested in real estate, and then a few years later became an appraiser.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
I never knew that about you. I've known you quite a while.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing a little about you. It's good to know those little things that sometimes we just never find out.
That's right.
Right? So today we're going to talk a little bit about adding value to our home. And I'd like to go through a couple of pictures with you and just figure out, does this add value? And I want to preface it with, it's never black and white. It seems like it's never black and white. So we'll just take a look. So if someone is cleaning and decluttering, does that add any value in the eyes of the appraiser?
I can't let clutter create a situation that there's value or not value, because clutter isn't necessarily, it's the bare bones of the house and the interior, how it's put together and designed and so forth. So the clutter I have to overlook as an appraiser.
You have to have that set of eyes that can see past the mess or whatever it is.
Right, yeah.
Look at the bones, kind of, yeah.
Correct.
Yep.
People are very concerned with that when I show up. Oh, they wish they would have cleaned more and stuff. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. I'm looking at structural things and things like that.
Right, and when we come at this with our realtor eyes, we're like, oh, dear Lord, please.
Exactly. It's a whole different story then.
Yeah. Yes. How about if we add usable square footage? So we convert our attic into living space. Does that add value?
Definitely.
Yes.
Definitely. And most of the time you'll find that like 1.5 stories are finished with a bedroom and possibly a bath up there. Yes, definitely adds value.
Yep. It looks like it would add value. I don't see how it couldn't add value. Yeah.
Right.
What if it wasn't quite as pretty? What if it was just sheetrocked and, mudded tape, just sheetrocked and basic flooring? Like,
Well, the quality of finish enters in because we have to assess the home as overall a certain type of quality. So yes, depending on how well it's finished, that does make a difference.
Sure. That makes sense. What if we are sprucing up our paint? So maybe the outside is looking a little worn and we put fresh paint on. How does that affect the value, if at all?
That comes into play with the type of loan that the buyer is working with.
Okay.
If it's like a VA, FHA rural development, chipped and peeling paint anywhere on the property is a no-no.
Yes.
And before they can get the loan, they would have to get that cleaned up. So in our eyes as an appraiser, if I show up at a house that has all the chipped and peeling paint taken care of, it's a bonus. It saves time.
Yes.
And they can go faster into the closing of the loan and so forth. Otherwise, they have repairs they have to do. So, yes, it definitely makes a difference to have all that taken care of.
It makes a smoother transaction.
Correct.
It does. So what if I'm just changing the paint color of my house? Like, it's in perfect condition, but I don't like brown and I want it to be blue. Does that add or affect value?
Not necessarily the value, because that's in the eye of the beholder. You might see someone that likes a brown house and they wish they would have left it brown, and then the next person says, oh, I love the blue. So it just depends. But, just having it spruced up and stuff is really a good idea.
Yes. How about if we are updating our exterior doors and windows? What do you think about that as far as value goes?
Oh, windows are a big thing. They're costly.
Yeah.
But having new windows is energy saving. Plus, at some point, everybody has to do it. So, yes, it's definitely a good idea. But then, it all depends on when you're doing this, too, because you're probably not right before you sell the house and leaving that house going to put all new windows in because of the cost.
Yep.
So it just depends on the situation.
It's a tough one. If this is your primary home and you're going to be there a long time, that might be a really good place to put your money. But, there's just always different factors. It's never black and white, people.
Right.
It never
it's
is.
Not black and white.
There's always so many variables. How about in the kitchen? Everybody says, update the kitchen. That adds value. So in this instance, all they did was paint and change the hardware. Everything else is the same, but boy, it looks different.
This, with those two pictures, I think it's mostly eye appeal and it's personal preference again, because to me, those are nice wood cabinets. They look like they're oak.
Yeah.
And the white cabinets are awesome too. And it depends on if someone wants the white or the oak. And so in that case, that isn't going to make much of a difference at all.
It's not a value thing there.
No.
That's a realtor thing.
Yeah.
More.
Yeah.
And that's yes. How about, this is our house. So last week we talked about our reno and stuff. What if you do something like we did, where we started with this dated kitchen and now we have this modern kitchen? Does that affect value?
Yeah, it does, because you have updated. When we're answering questions in an appraisal report, it'll ask about updates. So I'll put in their kitchen updated in, whatever year.
Sure.
And explain all the updates that were done. So it definitely, that makes a difference, yes.
So there's like different levels of updating the kitchen that will play into this. And then the last one is staging. So what do you think, staging? Does it add value?
Staging for a real estate transaction could add value because it adds warmth and coziness and so forth. Staging for an appraisal doesn't make any difference because, again, we're not looking at the type of furniture that you have in there or whatever. We're looking at the bones of the property.
Right. It's almost similar to clutter.
Correct.
Except it's the opposite. It's pretty instead of not pretty.
That is true.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That is good stuff. And it just helps people know kind of where to put their energy when they're working on their house and they want to add that actual value. So thank you for going through those with me.
You bet.
Next up, would you tell me a little about what's the difference between appraisal types? You mentioned like the VA and the FHA earlier have different requirements. What are just like a couple of those?
Yeah. Well, as we mentioned, VA and FHA versus conventional, chipped and peeling paint is huge because there's rules out there that there cannot be any on the property. So that means if your picket fence has chipped and peeling paint, or your garage door, or your back entrance door, or siding, that has to be taken care of. We're required to check the attics on those type of appraisals because sometimes you'll find that there's very, very minimal. And if it's an older house and it's typical for the neighborhood to have a certain amount of insulation, it might not be quite as big an issue. But, that's a big cost savings if you have.
So you have to find the attic or the little scuttle and get up in there and peek into those attics.
Head and shoulder picture, it's a
boy.
lot of fun.
Yeah, I always go in the basements. I rarely peek in the attic.
No.
I just don't.
Right.
But,
right.
That's all right. That's exciting. What about if I have a conventional appraisal? What would be a red flag on a conventional appraisal? Is there any particular?
We have to look for safety or health issues. And so in my appraisals, if I run into a garage and there's all kinds of outlets that don't have covers or switches that don't have covers, I will call for them because it's a safety issue.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's probably the first thing that comes to my mind.
It just seems like sometimes those conventional appraisals are a little easier to get to go maybe than the FHA or the VA. So it's different for each one.
Correct.
They have their own rules.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Again, this is good stuff, Peggy. I love it. How does the appraisal protect the buyer?
Well, sometimes when we're buying a home, we get pretty darn excited when we find that right home. And so sometimes, not everybody, but a lot of times you get so emotionally involved in it that you forget that maybe the price isn't quite where it should be. Mm-hmm. And when an appraiser comes in and values that home, because they're pulling all the information from the market to prove out, is it worth that? Is it worth more? Is it worth less? That's a protection for the buyer as well as the bank, because you don't want to put too much into a home, even though it's the one you love.
Yes, and we saw some of that, in the last couple years here. I'm glad we maybe are moving away from that, because it just never sat well to see people doing that. But it kind of sounds like you're saying that the market sets the price, really. It's not like definitely. You come in and set the price. It's the market.
It's the market. Everything we do with an appraisal is based on market. Mm-hmm. And so it's not our opinion. It's what we prove out from the market.
Yep. Yeah, that's a fabulous way of putting it. Yes. So my final question today is, how can we start a tiny home village in Aberdeen?
Well, I don't know. That's kind of interesting, because I'm not real well versed in that, because we really don't have a lot of that going on here. I've been exposed to tiny homes out in Arizona and California when I've been there, so I've been in them, but I think, once you got something started, if someone wanted to start it, as an appraiser, we definitely would probably have to do a cost approach on it to prove it out, because you don't have the exact comps to prove it out. Right. But when we don't have everything just the same, we have to branch out, and we have all kinds of rules and regulations that we have to follow, but we have to branch out and find the best comps available to help prove that. The other way to set the price is if some cash deals would be done. Yep. And then once those tiny homes have closed, then they become available to be used as comparables.
Yes. And so when we're looking for comps, do we need a certain number? Is 1 enough, or do we need 3 or 5? Like, is there a rule of thumb, maybe?
When we're doing an appraisal, we have to put at least 3 comparables in a property. Yeah. Sometimes I'll use 6. It depends on the property. In this last market, there haven't been enough comps available, so you usually end up with 3 or 4.
Yeah, right. You take whatever you can find. It's tough. Times are tough, people, and that's all right. We'll get through it. But tiny homes. So I think this is really fun stuff. I would like to see somebody get out there and set these comps for us, because I think that we have a need for more housing, and why not?
Sure. Well, it's an up and coming trend, so it'll get here.
It'll get here. Yeah. Right. We're always a little behind.
Right. Right.
Yes. Well, this is all great stuff that people should know. So, Peggy, thank you so much for chatting with us today on Home with Jess Nilson.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.